What is happening, everybody? James Hancock here. Today it is my pleasure and my great privilege to review one of my favorite films of the year, The Banshees of Inisherin from writer-director Martin McDonagh. The film's a reunion with his stars from probably his most famous movie, In Bruges, but we have the legendary Brendan Gleeson and Colin Farrell, and these two guys were just born to work together. And if people are looking to have the same experience of In Bruges again, they'll be disappointed. I would just say, go watch In Bruges again. You can watch that movie 5, 10, 15 times. It's one of the most quotable and just savagely, wickedly funny movies of the last 20 years. The Banshees of Inisherin is quite different. It's funny as hell, but it's full of like existential angst and despair, but also these very moving, dark, poetic kind of contemplations about how one should spend one's time as you're contemplating and ruminating about your own demise. What is the purpose of life? And if that sounds very highbrow and pretentious, it's not. This is one of those kind of art house films that could very easily play in a multiplex when old people sit around saying, how come they never make movies like they used to? Well, go see The Banshees of Inisherin because it fucking rocks. And if people buy tickets to see it, guess what? You will get more movies like this. And in the era of streaming, it is a very rare, wonderful, beautiful thing to just see a kick-ass movie, something that is pure raw cinema, something that is visual storytelling. There's so many great streaming shows these days, but they tend to be very plot-driven, very writer-driven, very producer-driven. Cinema, for me, is the art of visual storytelling, where you have a director with a very dynamic, distinct, unique voice telling their story their way. And I saw it with a crowd down at the Angelica on Houston here in New York. Packed house. I haven't seen the Angelica that crowded in a long time. But also the Park Chan-wook film Decision to Leave was playing in the next theater. Anyway, it was just a madhouse. People always say cinema is dead, but it's not dead in New York. I mean, the Angelica was doing some serious business, and I was a little worried because it was so crowded. I was like, once you have a crowd, all it takes is one person to ruin the experience. But luckily, the crowd turned off their phones, they stopped whispering, they stopped talking, and they just got totally sucked into this movie. And because the movie is just so mean and nasty when it comes to its sense of humor, I can't remember the last time I had a crowd experience where a packed room was cackling wildly with glee at dark comedy. We very rarely get that experience in the movie theater these days. I can't remember the last time it happened. And so it's possible that my positive impression of the film was swayed by or influenced by just the contagious enthusiasm of the room, but that is what people talk about when they're describing the theatrical experience. When you have a rare experience with a crowd that knows how to behave in public, then it's pure magic when you have an entire room that's kind of almost having this like religious experience together. But I've been talking quite a bit at this point without saying anything about the movie, so let's actually discuss the movie itself, and the plot's relatively simple. You have a remote island off the coast of Ireland in 1923. On the mainland, the Irish Civil War is still fully underway, but that's very much part of the backdrop of the film where you hear the occasional rifle shot or cannon fire. This island has its own unique way of life where it's mostly like farmers and fishermen or musicians quietly writing their tunes. And you've got these two guys played by Colin Farrell and Brendan Gleeson where every single day when their workday ends at roughly 2 p.m., everybody goes down to the neighborhood pub to have a few pints and listen to tunes and just talk about their animals or whatever the case might be. And after decades and decades of friendship, suddenly Brendan Gleeson's character decides he doesn't like Colin Farrell anymore. And he's very abrupt and very assertive about basically, please don't talk to me anymore. I just don't like you anymore. I'm going to go sit over here. You sit over here. Just don't talk to me anymore. And Colin Farrell is like the quintessential, just nice, kind of simple guy who likes talking about like his donkey droppings and things like that, but doesn't have a ton to say, but he's just an all-around good guy. And for Brendan Gleeson, that's no longer interesting enough or good enough, and he just wants to spend his time focused on his music. But when Colin Farrell refuses to get the message, as we see in the trailer, Brendan Gleeson has to basically say, or has to threaten bodily dismemberment of his own left hand, his fingering hand for the fiddle. He says, every time you talk to me, I'm going to cut off one of my own fingers. I mean, it is ruthless and it's dark, but for people who know Martin McDonagh's work, that should come as no surprise. because he's written a lot of plays and directed a handful of films, and violence and comedy are always being stirred together in interesting ways. I mean, his first short film, which is called Six Shooter, has one of the funniest little chapters imaginable where you get to see a cow explode in all directions. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, short film 2004, it's available on YouTube. Hunt it down, well worth it. And of course, In Bruges, I mean, that's a movie about death and killing and friendship. I mean, it's just ruthless. But my first exposure to Martin McDonagh was his play A Behanding in Spokane, where Christopher Walken was playing one of the main roles, and it was absolutely delightful to watch that play unfold in the flesh. But it also is about bodily dismemberment. I mean, Martin McDonagh must sit around just obsessing over chopping off his own limbs or something, but the Banshees of Inisherin definitely revisits these topics. But the film has so much more to offer than just the relationship between these two men, because it's a small, remote village where everybody knows each other, and the characters that are fleshed out and the ensemble cast is just jaw-dropping. So let's start with Carrie Condon. Carrie Condon is just an angel, and I've been loving her and stuff since, like, I guess going back to Rome is incredible, but people know her from playing the voice of Iron Man's armor in the MCU. I mean, she's done tons of stuff, but she plays the sister of Colin Farrell, and she is, sweet as can be, and probably the only person on the island with an education. She actually likes to read, which makes her a total social outcast. But she, in her own way, can be ruthless and funny as hell as well. She makes her own observations about the behavior of the men on the island. Or then you've got Barry Keoghan as the character Dominic, who's basically the village idiot. And, I mean, Barry Keoghan at this point is easily one of the best and brightest young actors of his generation. And he's able to do the big-budget studio movies or the small little art house films. But if you look at the filmography that he's amassed in a very short time, he's one of those actors that seems to be systematically hunting down the best and brightest directors in the world, because he's always done films like Dunkirk with Christopher Nolan or The Killing of a Sacred Deer. And there's this amazing, unpredictable energy to his performance where, of all the people in this village, he might be the only person who's a little more simple and a little bit more dull than Colin Farrell's character. And so we get these kind of twin relationships where we can tell that Brendan Gleeson is bored by Colin Farrell, but when Colin Farrell's off, having a few drinks with Barry Keoghan, he's bored by him. And so, yeah, this is a village where there's just not enough going on, where people just have their routine, where you wake up, you milk your animals, you put the milk on the cart, you take it into town, you sell it, you go have a few pints, and then on Sunday, you'll break up the monotony of the routine by going to church. But otherwise, there's no cultural outlet of any kind. And if this quiet way of life sounds very tedious and boring, all I'll say is that after you watch this movie, you're going to want to rush to the closest bar and find yourself a good pint. I am partial to Smithwick's Red Ale. That's my favorite Irish beer, and I was just salivating at the prospect of drinking a pint of Smithwick's while watching this. But I haven't mentioned yet David Pierce, who pops up in this as the local priest. He is absolutely brilliant, and he's appeared in some of Martin McDonagh's other films. And he's the farmer in Martin McDonagh's film Six Shooter, who's responsible for the exploding cow. But perhaps the scenes where I laughed the hardest are those where Brendan Gleeson, who's clearly deep in the throes of depression, goes to make his confession, and their interactions they're special. I will not attempt to replicate them here because that would be an exercise in futility. But what I really appreciated about this movie is how there is so much legitimate darkness at its core, which somehow enhances the flavor of the comedy, where people have some really frank conversations about the Irish Civil War, not from a political standpoint, but almost from this strange indifference where there's a local policeman who periodically has to go to the mainland to handle executions, but they're so removed from the conflict, he can't even keep track of who's paying his salary when he shows up to do these executions. And to hear an Irishman speaking so casually about all the death on the mainland, it's some really brutal, frank stuff. And I'm not going to put my foot in my mouth by offering any opinions on Irish history or Irish politics, but I would love to hear from some Irishmen what they think about those particular scenes. But what really hammers home just the overall melancholy of the movie are these long, lingering, beautiful shots of the island where I don't know if there's a tree on the entire island. It's just rocks and walls and animals and a pub and a church. And I would say there's some of the most beautiful shots that I've seen in all of European cinema. I mean, people are going to be drawing comparisons to filmmakers like Carl Theodor Dreyer or Ingmar Bergman or some of these giant luminaries. It really is just a staggering visual achievement. And let me look up the DP real quick just to make sure that I give credit where credit is due. And the DP's name is Ben Davis, so high five to Ben Davis. I mean, this is easily the most beautiful film that Martin McDonagh has shot visually. But getting back to the main two actors, it's funny how Colin Farrell, when he first emerged on the scene in the early 2000s, was initially being cast in all these roles that made him seem like just the latest Hollywood cheeseball who was kind of good looking, but you didn't quite know if there was any real depth there. But in recent years, he's just emerged as this incredible art house darling. And I think he does a brilliant job of keeping one foot in the art house world and one foot in kind of the mainstream world. And for my money, I feel like the line between those two worlds needs to be obliterated, because there was a period like in the early 70s, mid 70s, where prestige films and blockbuster films could sometimes overlap, which is how you get films like The Deer Hunter or The Godfather, where are they designed, are they crowd pleasers, or are they designed for the most sophisticated audience out there? Well, the answer was both. And for me, that's when you get a real classic, because great cinema should not be limited to a few 100,000 people who happen to live in big cities. Great cinema should be for everybody. And I know a lot of people my age or older who never go to the movies at all because they say, oh, well, everything at the theater is just for kids, or it's just for dumbasses, or whatever the case might be. But we have to accept some responsibility in the movies that get sold to us or marketed to us, because if we don't show up, well, then the people who finance movies are going to say, oh, well, then anything for adults should just go to Netflix or HBO or whatever, and the multiplex will all just be popcorn movies for kind of the whole family. If adults go and support movies like this, well, guess what? More investors will get behind movies like this, and so then a director like Martin McDonagh, who currently only has 4 feature films and 1 short to his name, well, he'll get to make more movies. So don't wait for this film to be available online. Hunt this sucker down, see it in the theater. And if they're a way for Colin Farrell and Brendan Gleeson to share the Best Actor award, I'd be all for it. People are going to be really divided on who delivers the better performance, but they're both absolutely incredible. But Colin Farrell perhaps is the more tender performance, and your heart's just going to go out to this guy. There's scenes of him just sitting alone with his animals, just totally depressed, totally at a loss as to why his best friend no longer wants to spend time with him. That is going to absolutely make you weep. But then there's scenes with Brendan Gleeson hanging out in the pub, teaching music to his friends and playing the fiddle, that are also going to blow your mind. It's a magical movie. And when I finally decide to do my top 10 list for the year, there's a very good chance that it might end up being number 1. Now, as I get close to the end of my video, I do need to give a shout out to a few projects I've been involved with recently related to Irish cinema. Back on episode 496 of my podcast, Wrong Reel, filmmaker Robert Amaro was nice enough to come on the podcast, and we talked about 30 years of Irish cinema, many of which are films that Martin McDonagh was involved with. But that was kind of my first taste of a lot of different Irish filmmakers that I was unfamiliar with, and it was an absolute blast doing the deep dive. But then fast forward to spring of 2022, Robert Amaro invited me over to Ireland in April, so I went over there with my buddy Bill Scurry. We met up with filmmaker Simon O'Neill and Robert Amaro, and we just traveled from one location to another, famous movie locations in Ireland, and we would just do these rants about the films, whether they're talking about Excalibur or In the Name of the Father or Duck You Sucker, whatever the case might be. So if you're curious about any of this content, I'm going to leave some links down in the description below. First, I'll leave a link to the podcast where we just tackle 30 years of Irish cinema. But the real home run experience will be watching Once Upon a Time in Ireland Parts 1 and 2, which are available on YouTube. And if you would give them a look, you would have my thanks and appreciation. Of all the travel and work experiences that I've had in recent years, that is easily the best experience I've had that I can remember. But before I go, I have to bring you a message from Manscaped, the official sponsor of my podcast, Wrong Reel. And here's a message about this upcoming holiday season. This holiday season, I'll be giving thanks to our friends over at Manscaped. Everyone loves turkey and stuffing, but you'll be looking like dessert with the help of Manscaped's Performance Package 4.0. The leaders in below-the-waist grooming have blessed you with the ultimate Thanksgiving dinner topic. Tell your in-laws about your new cutting-edge ball trimmer and gift yourself or the man in your life the ultimate men's hygiene bundle. Trim your pumpkins by going to manscaped.com and use the code WRONGREEL in all caps for free shipping and 20% off. Inside, you'll find their Lawnmower 4.0 trimmer, Weed Whacker ear and nose hair trimmer, Crop Preserver ball deodorant, Crop Reviver toner, Performance boxer briefs, and a travel bag to hold your goodies. Think of it as a cornucopia for your balls. Their Lawnmower 4.0 trimmer features a cutting-edge ceramic blade to reduce grooming accidents thanks to their advanced skin-safe technology. It also gives you the ability to turn on the 4000K LED spotlight on and off when needed for a more precise shave. Plus, it's waterproof. So if you like my YouTube channel or if you like my podcast, Wrong Reel, making a purchase at Manscaped with the discount code Wrong Reel is the best way to support my endeavors. But hope you enjoyed this video. If so, please remember to like the video, subscribe to the channel, hit that notification bell. And if you want to talk more about Martin McDonagh, hunt me down on Twitter at Geeking Out. But I hope everyone has an amazing weekend. Hope everybody goes to see the Banshees of Inisherin. And more importantly, as always, onwards and upwards.